Welcome back. My name is Susan Winebrenner, and I'm presenting a series of video lectures to you regarding how to teach kids with learning difficulties of any age in any type of classroom. The strategies that I'm mentioning are in my book, Teaching Kids with Learning Difficulties in Today's Classroom, and I had a lovely co-author on much of this book, Lisa Kiss from Pennsylvania, and together we've created a marvelous tool for you to use with your own children, with the students you teach, and sometimes even with yourself. So in the first video in this series, we talked about what does it mean to have a learning difficulty, and where does it come from, and what can we do about it. Today I want to start with more information on these kids and what kind of experiences you would like to provide for them to create the best learning outcomes possible. So the kids who are strugglers, generally, do not learn by listening, and therefore they have been at a disadvantage since kindergarten or even before, because teachers frequently talk a lot and these kids kind of go off into la-la land if somebody's talking at them too long. Their preferred learning methods are visual, tactile, and kinesthetic. If they can't move during the school day, their brain goes to sleep. And yet, because many of them end up with serious behavior problems, which I'll explain in a moment, they are not allowed to do that, and they are often required to sit very long periods of time, which seriously closes down their learning capacity. I'd like to tell you a little more about why these are the kinds of kids who frequently get into trouble. Since their very earliest years in school, they have considered themselves to be dumb, stupid, and incapable of learning. And many of their experiences have reinforced that. It is not because people who prefer visual, tactile, and kinesthetic learning experiences are less intelligent than people who are able to learn by listening to a lot of talk. It's just that is not the way that material is presented. It is not the typical learning experience in most classrooms. Standards-based learning and experiences with hands-on learning and problem solving, those kinds of things, are much more likely to lead to learning success for these kids. But when they are required, as they are frequently in middle and high school classrooms, it's not a good match. So visual, tactile, kinesthetic learners do not appreciate reading word for word, and therefore sometimes it seems that they miss a lot of details. They skim a lot, they use visual cues like pictures and charts and graphs and animated videos, and they will be much more likely to be able to successfully intake that material and use it than if all of their intake is required by listening. So all kinds of visual organizers like thinkingmaps.com are fabulous, so that while we're talking, we're also transferring the information to something visual. When we present the necessary information in a visual format, these kids get then an advantage when they're being assessed. Because when they've learned with a visual attached, they can close their eyes as they start a test and they can see that chart or see that visual, and they can even see some of the information that's on it. I call it a legal cheat sheet, because there's no paper, there's nothing in their palm, there's nothing written on their wrist, but they can visualize these graphic organizers. So thinkingmaps.com is one place that you can find some that are very easy to use and quite inexpensive or even free, and other sources that you can find on the internet when you ask for visual graphic organizers. In terms of literature or even content from informational text, they like excitement. They are not going to sit still for lengthy passages of descriptions of characters or events because they want to find out what's really happening. So our belief is that you should start with the most exciting stuff first. Now, you may not have time to get back to the other stuff, but when you start with the exciting things, you are going to provide better opportunities for them to have success. And a successful student is a much different type of student than one whose only evidence has shown her, I just can't do this. They often read the end of the book first, and that drives teachers crazy, especially if it's fiction. What are you doing? Well, I have to see how it ends. Well, once you know how it ends, why would you want to read it? Well, if I don't like the ending, I'll be sad that I read it in the first place. So we use that ability to present things in quite a different way. We present things as a whole first, before we do the parts. Whereas kids who process auditorially are perfectly happy to learn the parts in little pieces and sequential pieces until they build up to the whole. These kids must experience or see the whole first. So if it's a geography lesson or a social studies lesson about the countries of Central America, showing a video first before you get into the content in other formats is ever so much better and more successful for them. They're frequently drawing or doodling while they're listening, and it makes teachers crazy. What are you doing? I'm listening to you. No, but what are you doing with that pencil? I'm just doodling. Well, would you mind putting that down and listening to me? But here's an interesting fact. While they're drawing or doodling, they are making that information cemented in a visual format in their brain. And they can remember what they were doing or what you were saying while they were drawing this particular doodle. They are much more likely to remember content where action and humor are involved than where those elements are missing. They are not morning learners, and yet for years elementary teachers have been taught to teach the most difficult content in the morning when kids are most alert. Well, some kids are most alert in the morning, but not kids who learn visually, tactile, kinesthetically, whose, by the way, abbreviated term is global learners. Auditory learners who learn by listening are auditory learners and analytic thinkers. Kids who learn best the other ways, visual, tactile, kinesthetic, are not analytic. They are global, which means they've got to see the big picture and they've got to keep referring back to the big picture while they're learning the details. And they're not morning people. They like to eat, chew, move around, learn by doing, hands-on activities, what we call being there experiences, which are ways to bring historical events to life for them, because if it's done in a context of a drama or something that brings it into today's time period, they're much more likely to remember that. They're chewing, they're eating, they're fidgeting, they're humming. Why? Because they haven't eaten breakfast. Why? Because they don't go to bed until very late. They have handwriting problems. In other decades, that was really a serious problem, and now with all of the technology related to teaching kids how to write more easily, it's not an issue so much anymore. They really don't like conversation. They are not interested in group work usually, and they always learn better later in the day. So what are you going to do with them in the morning? You're going to make sure that before every academic activity, you get them up and moving. Find some exercises or other resources that allow you to engage them in 2 to 3 minutes of physical exercise while standing beside their desk, and that will activate the brain and make it easier for both sides of the brain to talk to each other. So, the first thing we have to do is ask ourselves, what do I need to do differently in order to make sure that they are experiencing the best conditions possible for them to be able to learn successfully? To summarize what kinds of activities are successful for them, I've created an acronym that is holistic, spelled WHOLISTIC. And in the Green Book, there is a page filled with that acronym in a format that can be used as bookmarks for you. So let me go through each one of those letters and tell you what they mean. And my philosophy is, and my strong belief is, the more of these elements you can include in your planning, the more likely it is that these kids who have usually been very unsuccessful in school can now become successful. One of the things you may have noticed as I've been talking about this is that students who come from white-collar families are generally more successful than students who come from blue-collar families. It has nothing to do with intelligence, though. Those differences in learning success, in my opinion, are only a reflection of whether or not the way they've been taught matches the way their brain likes to process information. You may remember an educational pioneer named John Dewey, as in Dewey Decimal System, whose work with students in the 1920s and 30s was landmark, and he believed, working mostly with blue-collar families, that people who earn their livings with their hands instead of their heads particularly, his philosophy was get them up and moving and you won't have any trouble. Get them actively engaged in the learning task and you won't have any trouble. So we continue to revere John Dewey, but we don't follow his guidelines. So, holistic. And we'll have a slide for this so you can follow along. The W stands for whole to parts. Always remember, you don't start with the part, you start with the whole. So that whole is represented as perhaps a graphic organizer. In this book, for example, there's a graphic organizer for elements of a story or elements that characters exhibit. And it is a content organization chart, and it shows you how to teach the kids how all of those parts fit together visually. The H in holistic is hands-on learning. Students who learn best this way have got to actually do the activities, not listen to an explanation of them. O stands for organize information visually. L is know what their learning modality strengths are and provide opportunities in those areas. I stands for immerse all the senses. The more senses that you can include in a learning experience, the more likely these kids will be successful. S is seek patterns and connections. The most important thing that is related to this is in order for the brain to learn something new, it must be able to connect it to a pattern it already knows, to a category it already knows. So that brand new content that the people have no connection to is very, very difficult for these kids to process. T stands for technology. Oh my goodness, teaching in today's classroom is so much easier for these kids and their teachers because the technology is out there, and finally education has come to the place where we don't think it's cheating to let kids use technology. We have learned how to harness the benefits of it. Integrate skills into content is what the I stands for. So if you are seeing yourself in a position where you're teaching skill work that has no connection, stop and find a way to use meaningful content to enhance it. And C means always start with the concrete, hands-on, and move from concrete to abstract. That's enough information for you to have today to really begin to turn kids around who are consistently unsuccessful, and I know that this information will help you. Links to accessing more information are provided at the bottom of this video. Thanks for being with me today, and please join me again for another video in this series.